Purpose of this video is to show you how to create a standalone Apex instance using the Oracle REST Data Services Java client on a EC2, its own EC2 instance. So in a former video I showed you how to create how to install Oracle 12c database onto EC2 instance, and now we are going to put the REST data services listener on another EC2 instance and hook it up to that database and run Apex. So the database we're going to be operating on is actually a 12c container database with a pluggable database on it, and we are going to install Apex on a pluggable database, and there's a couple of tricks involved with doing this. But first, let's get our EC2 instance up and ready to go. So here I'm going to click on the EC2 console, and I'm going to come in here and launch an instance, and I'm going to, just like the database Amazon machine image we put together, we're going to use the Oracle Linux community image that we've been able to find out here. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. The free tier eligible micro instance is plenty of machine for our purposes here. I'm going to make sure that I put it in the same zone as my database to make communication quick. The default storage amount will be just fine. I will tag this instance so I can remember what it's for. So we'll call this our example Apex box, I guess 12C. Security, it comes with the default port open for SSH. We're going to want to actually add the port that we're going to open for our Apex listener here. So I'm going to just open port 8080. And now we're going to launch this instance. Now, if you haven't created a key pair before, I will leave it to you to do it. It's pretty easy. Just say create a new key pair. And then this just creates a public-private key that you can use to log into your machines remotely. I already have one that I've created, so I'm just going to associate this instance with that key pair and go ahead and launch the instance. Now I'll come back to my instance panel here, and you can see that the Apex box is in the midst of firing up here, so we're just going to go ahead and let that do it. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to go ahead and start up my database machine. So that should start up in pretty short order, and a number of the tasks that we're going to need to do we'll actually do on that machine today. All right, you can see that our machines are up and running now, and one word of caution: if you followed through and did the database example perhaps a day or two ago and you shut this machine down, when these machines fire back up, the public DNS entry they have changes. So if you've saved a connection in MobaXterm for this and also in SQL Developer, it's important to know that every time you shut it down, you're going to come up with a different public DNS and public IP address, because Amazon recycles these on a regular basis. Now, everything else on the Amazon side of things should still work just fine, but just be aware of that, or otherwise you'll be frustrated wondering why some of your connections don't work. So we're going to go ahead and actually log into our example Apex box here. So I'm going to bring MobaXterm on over. and we are going to create a new connection here, a new session, and it's going to be SSH, and I'm going to copy this public DNS address that we have down here on our AWS page, and I'm going to paste that right here in the remote host. I know that the default user for all of these EC2 instances is EC2 user, and then in our advanced settings I'm going to go ahead and tell mobxterm about the key pair that it needs to use. Now that we have that, I'll just go to my bookmark and give this session name something that I can find again. And say OK. So now we have this connection, we have connected, and then the number one thing I always do the first time I log into these boxes is switch the password for the EC2 user, so that when we want to jump back and forth between users when we're on the machine, we actually know what the password of the user is. So I will change the password to something simple, which is totally recommended, and obviously you don't want to do this on boxes that you care about, but for example case, if I make this some cryptic password, I'll never remember it. So I've gone ahead and reset our EC2 user. Now I am going to install a couple of utilities that we need on this machine using the yum utility, which will go out to the various repositories on the internet and download and install the software for me. And by putting the -y option at the end, I can avoid having to confirm that I want it to do everything that I want it to do. So we're just going to install wget and Perl, and just to be safe, we'll check and see if we need any updates, which we probably won't. And it looks like everything is good there. All right, so we've installed those utilities that we need. The next thing we're going to want to do is actually add an Apex user for this box. So I'm going to use the user add command using sudo, which means act as the root user, which the EC2 user on these machines has the capacity to do. And so I've added this Apex user. I then need to change the password for this user. And again, I will use poor practice in setting my password, and I will tell you to not do as I do, but do as I say. And now I'm going to switch to, one thing I'm going to do actually is switch users here to the Apex user we just created using my poorly conceived password. And then I'm going to make sure that I am in the home directory for this user. All right, now that we have created our Apex user, we just need to, and switch to the home directory of the Apex user, we just need to go ahead and set up the directory and file that will allow us to connect with this user remotely. So I'm going to make the SSH directory, and then I'm going to change the permissions to that directory to be the correct permissions. Next, I'm going to create an authorized key file or authorized keys file for our Apex user. And again, I'm going to change the permissions to the recommended settings for that. Now that I've created this key file, all I need to do is actually using a utility that Amazon provides. I'm going to pipe the public key into my authorized key file that goes with my public private key pair, the other half which resides on my local machine and we use with mobxterm to connect with. So now I've done that, and if we wanted to double check and make sure that that actually worked, we could use the Vim editor and just switch to that file. We would see that our key was actually here. So that's all good. So now that we've created the key file, we should be able to log out and log back in as our Apex user. So I'm going to go ahead and close this window here, and then I would need to edit my session here and actually change this username to the Apex user. Probably still have it set as the EC2 user. And after I do that, I should be able to double click on my connection, and if all has gone well, we are able to connect as our Apex user. So now that we have created our user and given that user permission to connect to the instance directory, we're going to make some directories that we're going to use to store our Oracle client, our Apex listener, and our Oracle REST Data Services listener. So first thing I will do is create a directory for our Oracle client. Then I'm going to create a directory for our Oracle REST Data Services. And now that I've done that, I'm actually going to want to upload some of the files I'm going to need to complete the installation of the components that we need on this machine. So if we come over here, because we're logged in as our Apex user here in MobeXterm, we should be able to just refresh this window and see the directories that we've created. So I'm actually going to put an Apex zip file right in this directory, because when we unzip it, it will create its own Apex directory. So let me just drag and drop that file here first. And the only thing we're actually going to need this file for on this server is there's an images directory inside of it, and other than that there's a bunch of SQL scripts which we'll actually end up using on the database, but we're going to do that work directly on the database rather than remotely. Now the other thing that we're going to need is the zip file for our ORDs, which we will actually direct to unzip into this directory. So we're going to do the same thing as we did with the Apex file and just drop it right here in the home Apex user directory. And you can see down here at the bottom that it's just queued that file up and will upload it for us when we get to it. And then the last thing we're going to want to do is put the Oracle client up here in this Oracle client. And we just need that so the Apex instance and everything can connect to the database instance, and also so that we can use utilities like SQL Plus directly from this box if we want to. So I'm going to go ahead and just drop the basic client and the SQL Plus instant client up here, and then we can see that all four of those are queued up and ready to go. So while we wait for those to upload, we can actually switch gears a little bit here and go on over to our database server, because there's a number of tasks we have to complete there. So here I'm actually logged in to our database server, and we can see in this software directory I've actually uploaded the Apex zip file that we're going to use to install the latest version of Apex on this database. Now, a couple of things we need to do before we start here. First of all, we can only do these operations on a container database that does not contain a pluggable database instance. And I happen to know when we created this one that it does have a pluggable instance, and so we'll need to get rid of that here quickly. So when we created our connection during the creation of our database, we would have put the old public DNS entry in here. And so because we turned our machine off and then turned it back on, we've got a new DNS entry, and so we just need to go ahead and fetch that here. So back here in my AWS console, I'm just going to click on my database machine. I'm going to go ahead and grab the public DNS it has today, and then I will switch back to SQL Developer and I will paste that DNS in there. And besides that, everything else should work exactly the same. So if we test that, we'll see that that we can't connect, and that's actually because I did start the database machine up, but I didn't actually start the database. So let's actually walk through that quickly here. So I'm logged in as the Oracle user here. So if I just type /space ORAENV, that will set the parameters for my user here. Now I know my SID is ORCL. And now all the parameters that need to be set for the SQL Plus client to work and us to be able to get to the listener control will actually work now. So first thing that I'm going to do is just go ahead and start our listener by typing lsnrctl start. And then we can see that our listener started right up, and now we will start SQL Plus by just typing SQL Plus / and then as sysdba, and because we're on the same machine as the database, this will work just fine without the username and password. And it helps if you spell things correctly when you enter them. So now we're logged into SQL Plus here, and I'm going to go ahead and actually exit back out of here and clear the screen off before we do this. Now let's just try that one more time. Now we're logged into the database. You can see it's telling us we're connected to a idle instance. I'm just going to go ahead and type startup. And the database will spring to life here. And in just a second should be available for us to use. So now we can exit out of SQL Plus and we can check our listener status, and we should see that the database has registered its services with the listener. So at this point we ought to be able to connect with SQL Plus, and the only reason I'm going to use SQL Plus in this situation is basically because I'm lazy and I find some of this container database stuff just easier to do from the SQL Plus interface. So let's go ahead and test our connection here. We can see now that we're able to successfully connect. I'm going to go ahead and save it with a new IP address, hit the connect, and we should be connected here. So one of the handy things about SQL Developer is if you select this DBA menu option under View here, you'll get this window down here that allows you to actually do a number of things like creating data files and table spaces and all that type of stuff kind of auto magically. And you can see one of our things down here is the container database. I know that this PDB Oracle has to go in order for the things I'm about to do to it, so I'm just going to go ahead and drop this pluggable database, and I'm going to select the including data file options because I know that this is an empty database and there's nothing in those data files that I would want to save. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply there. And then we can see, all right, that command has successfully processed, and we're ready to jump back into SQL Plus now. So we're back over here in MOBA Xterm, and one of the things we need to do now is uninstall Apex from the database. And in order to do that, we're going to need to actually go down to the directory that the Apex scripts are located in before we start up SQL Plus to make all these commands easy to issue here. So I'm just going to go ahead and switch to the Apex directory. And if we were to do the ls command here, we can see there's a whole pile of scripts used for manipulating Apex on the database. And the one that we are particularly interested in is the one that will remove Apex for us. So I'm going to go ahead and start SQL Plus again. And I actually ought to be able to just arrow up. And now that we have SQL Plus started, I am going to issue a command to remove Apex. And if we were to check the current version that's on here, I think we'd see it was, I think, version like 4.2 that comes with the database. And we're actually going to upgrade this to version 5. So we're going to go ahead and let this script do its thing. And it will actually do quite a few things here. It takes a couple of minutes for this to run, and ultimately we will should get a screen that tells us everything is pretty much okay. And then after that, what we will do is go back and create a pluggable database. Now, while we're waiting for this to happen, we can actually go back and check on our Apex instance and see how our file uploads are going. So coming back over here, we can actually see that it looks like our file uploads have completed, and we can do the things that we need to do here on this instance. So I'm just going to check the directory we're in. We are in the home directory of the Apex user. So now first thing I'm going to do is just unzip the Apex files. And the way that we do that is just type unzip, and we'll autocomplete Apex. And now when I do this, it will create its own directory, and it's just going to unzip all that stuff. And now if we do a list command, we'll see now we have this Apex directory. And the reason I like to keep the zip files out of the directories is if I mess something up and need to nuke all these things, I can just nuke the directory and the zip file is still sitting here conveniently to start over with. So the next thing we're going to do is kind of the exact same thing with the ords file. And here I'm going to tell it to unzip into the ords directory. All right, and it has happily completed that task as well. And if we were to do a list and switch into that directory, we'd see the things that have been created as a result of that. So now we're going to actually switch over to this Oracle client directory. And when we list this, we can see that we have these RPM files, right, which are really just the install files for Linux, and we can use the yum utility to actually accomplish installing our Oracle client for us. So what we're going to do is actually switch to our EC2 user so that we can use the sudo command and install these as root. So I'm switching to my EC2 user using my poorly formed password, and now I will type sudo, and we will actually install these using the RPM utility instead of yum. All right, so there's our instant client. And you can see, we've got a problem here. This is missing a dependency. We should actually be able to go out and find this by searching for it with yum. So if I type sudo yum and libaio, yum search libaio, with any luck, looky there, it went out and found it for us, right? We can see right here, this is a x86-64 box, and there's the library that this thing will apparently need to do what it needs to do. So now all we have to do is actually install that again using the yum utility. So we will say sudo yum and we need to put the install piece on that and then hit enter. And I forgot to put the -y, and it has gone ahead and installed that library for us. So now we ought to be able to install our instant client because we have resolved that dependency failure. So let's go ahead and give this another try. And you can see now it looks like, hey, I have the libraries I need in order to install, and life should be good. So we're installing the instant client, which just sets up the ability to communicate with a database. And now we will go ahead and install SQL Plus as well. And all these commands are on the blog post that accompanies this video. And then there's the command to install SQL Plus, and we are good to go. So in theory, we ought to be able to connect to our database with SQL Plus that is on our other machine at this point. So one of the things we're going to want to do in order to make our lives a little easier as an Apex user, should we want to use SQL Plus, is we're going to go ahead and switch back to our Apex user, and we are going to modify what's called our bash profile. And so what your bash profile is really just a file that sets a bunch of variables that allow programs to find the libraries and utilities they need in order to operate. So this is not unlike on Windows, where you have the environment variables that you sometimes have to set for tools such as, I don't know, Toad or something like that. You know, if you've ever installed any sort of complicated software on your Windows machine, then sooner or later you probably had to set an environment variable, and that is what the purpose of the bash profile is as well. So rather than having to switch and set these variables every time we log in, we can actually put them into our bash file, and then every time we log in we should be able to use that. So the command that I'm going to issue here is just using the Vim editor to open our bash profile, and we will see a rather simple file here for our Apex user. And we're just going to pop a couple lines in here, and then you know, with the documentation for the Oracle client, you can find this information that will basically tell you what you want to put in here to make it so the variables that you need in order to run SQL Plus and the Oracle client are set for a user. And so I'm just going to go ahead and paste these values in this original command that was in here. I'm just going to actually go ahead and move up by copying it, and then in Vim here we'll just move up put a couple more lines in, drop that in there. And then we will delete this down here. And we no longer need this line either. So as confusing as that may have looked, the net effect was we left the original entry in here that set a part of the path variable, and then we added these two lines to set some additional variables and put that information into path. So at this point, if we just do escape :WQ to write and quit the Vim editor, we should have everything we need, and then we can reload our bash profile to prove that we didn't mess anything up, and it'll be a miracle if I didn't there, but lo and behold, it appears that everything is good. And at this point we can actually start SQL Plus by just typing SQL+, and lo and behold, it actually started up. So now, just to prove that we have connectivity, we're going to go ahead and try and connect to our remote database using SQL Plus. So in order to connect to our database, our remote database here, we're actually going to enter the SQL Plus command with our username and password at our host name at the port 1521, utilizing the ORCL service as the sysdba role. And if we've done everything correctly here, hey, we've connected to our remote database, which means our Oracle client install was obviously successful here. So I'm going to go ahead and just exit at this point because I will prefer to go back to my database to perform the other things that we have to do here. So if we switch to back to our EC2 database, we can see that the remove script that we've run has finished, and it looks like finished correctly here. And now our old version of Apex has been removed. So now what I'm going to do is actually exit SQL Plus over here, and we're on the database server. And I'm going to rename this Apex directory. So I'm just going to jump up one level here, and then using the move command, I'm just going to name this Apex directory Apex old. And now if we take a look in here, we'll see that Apex has been named to Apex old, so we can unzip our new installation of Apex into this directory here. So in order to do that, if you remember, we put that Apex software up in our software directory. So I'm just going to fetch my directory name here and copy it to make my life easy. And then I am going to switch to the U01 software directory, and we'll clean our screen up here. And then if we list, see we have Apex. We're going to unzip our Apex zip file into the directory and use the path that we just copied. And this will create a new Apex directory down here in the DB home. And off it goes. And now we should be able to actually switch back to that Apex directory. Clean up our screen again. And if we do a list, we can see we've got all the new stuff inside of the database here. So at this point, what we're going to want to do is actually install Apex. And the way that we go about doing that is we're going to want to install that on a pluggable database. So that means we have to actually create the pluggable database, which you could easily do from SQL Plus right here in the interface. But I may have mentioned earlier that I am lazy, so I'm just going to use SQL Plus to do it. So I'm going to come in here. Now that we have uninstalled Apex from the container database, we will create a pluggable database, which is really just, you can almost think of as a virtual database on top of our database server. We're going to create a pluggable database and install Apex on it. So to make my life easy, I will call this PDB1. I will use my standard pour form. And then for the files, if we just select the custom names, it will put it into the default data file location. And at this point, we can just say apply. And in just a second here, this will actually create a pluggable database for us. And then we will just need to start that pluggable database, and then we will be ready to install Apex on top of it. All right, so that has completed, and now if we come back down here, we can see that our pluggable database is there. But if we take a look at the state of it, we'll notice that it's only mounted. It isn't actually open for business. So we're going to modify it to be read-write. And at this point, our database should be alive and well and ready to work with us. So just to prove that, I'm going to go ahead and copy the host name from our container database connection. And I just happen to have a connection set up here that should work. And so we will put this new host name in, and if all is well, if we test this, see that we're able to successfully connect to this database, which I'm going to go ahead and do. Because there is one other little undocumented feature here that you run into when you're dealing with these pluggable databases and installing Apex. So one of the things that the REST Data Services listener looks for when you're configuring it is a user's table space on the pluggable database. And I couldn't pretend to know why, but it's not there. And so there's lots of things out there about all the machinations you can do to alter the scripts or whatnot. Or if you're lazy like I am, you could just create a user's table space and be done. So I've got this command on my blog as well, and I'm just going to go ahead and create this table space on our pluggable database, and now I know that my pain and suffering will be lessened by the fact that the scripts won't blow up looking for this particular thing. So okay, I've used SQL Plus or SQL Developer here to accomplish the things I wanted to do, and now I'm going to go back to the database server and actually log in here and install Apex on the database. So in order to do this, I'm going to start up SQL Plus again as sysdba. And now what we need to be really careful about is when we have logged in here, we are logged into the case or the container database, which is, you can kind of think of as the mama database. And we need to actually log into the baby database or the pluggable one. And all we really need to do here is switch to that container database. And we can do that by issuing the alter session command. So I will say alter session. I would like to set the container to the PDB1 that we just created. And now, lo and behold, we've done that. And we can actually issue the commands that we need to issue here. So there is an install script, and it basically asks you to give it the name of the script and a couple of table spaces here, as well as the location for static resources for Apex. And so being lazy, I'm just going to use these table spaces, and I is the default and recommended value for that last piece here. And now I should be able to hit enter, and then this process actually takes quite a while. I would expect this to maybe run for 3 or 4 minutes. As it installs everything it does to install Apex. And that will just probably take, like I said, 2 or 3 minutes. After this is complete, we can actually do the last piece of configuration, which is to just run the setup on the ORDS listener on our other box. So we will wait for this Apex install to complete. We will do just a couple more configuration steps here with changing some passwords and creating some users, all using the scripts that are provided. And then we can do the final piece of actually turning on our Apex instance. And if you've followed along so far and been able to accomplish all these tasks, I think you'll be amazed at just how ridiculously easy it is to start up the Apex listener and get it all running over there on that other machine. All right, after several minutes, all of the scripts have run to create the Apex instance on our pluggable database, and at this point we just have a couple of more tasks we need to complete here. So we need to change the password for our Apex admin user, and in order to do that we just issue this change password script, and it's going to ask us for our administrator username, which we are creating right here, and I'll just take an admin, and then you can put in any old email you want to here. And then you just need to give it a password, and it's a little more controlling in this interface, so it will not allow you to use a really bad password, perhaps based on the name or something like that, so be careful about that. Next thing you need to do is actually issue the command to create the public user for the REST data services. So we'll do that by issuing this script, and it's going to want a password for the Apex listener user and the REST public user. And now those listeners are all set up. So at this point, you ought to be pretty much ready to go. Okay, one thing you're going to want to do before we start the install on the ORDS listener on our standalone EC2 instance is remember to unlock your Apex public user account here after we have created it. If you don't unlock this account, it will cause you pain and you will have to install that ORDS listener more than once. And we can jump back to our Apex server at this point. So here I am back at our EC2 instance where our Apex and ORDS listener live, and here a couple of things that you need to sort of be prepared for. One of the things you're going to need is the images file inside of this, or images directory inside of this Apex directory. So if you see over here, there's an images directory, and if we switch to that and then just do a present working directory, we'll want to copy this path right here because it's going to ask you for this path during the setup. So you're going to want to make sure that you have this ready to go when we run the ORDS setup. So now that we've done that, I'm just going to jump back up to where we were. I'm going to switch into the ORDS directory, and then you'll see here that we have a war file here for ORDS, and what you will use this for is the first time you run it, it'll actually take you through the setup process, and then in future runs, this is how you'll actually sort of start your server up, if you will, that serves the web pages to the world. So java-jar ords war. So, oh no, we don't have a Java JDK, and you know, this is one of the reasons I hate computers. But luckily for us, Yum to the rescue again. So if you were to just search for Java here, you'd want to switch your user back to EC2, and after you did that, you could do sudo yum search Java. You'll find that there's all sorts of JDKs out there that we can use, and I'm just going to go ahead and use the open JDK, and we will do -y to say yep, go ahead. And now it will give us all that we need in order to have a Java development kit running on our machine. And after this completes, we should be able to run our ORDS setup as we were attempting to do before we discovered that we were missing Java. So let's go ahead and switch our user back to our Apex user. And now I will reissue my command. And now we do have Java. And so here is the first sort of mysterious question that they don't do a great job of really telling you what's going on here or how to enter it. So this is no big deal. It just wants a place to put a directory, but it's really kind of overly sensitive about the way that you put it in here. So if you forget to put the slash in or something like that, it will get mad at you. Now, it doesn't particularly matter where you put this, but it is very important to have this slash at the end, or it will explode and you'll have to delete what you've done, or delete this ords directory and re-unzip everything again so that you can get the config to work again. So anyways, we'll give it that. With any luck, it will not be unhappy with this. And now it's actually asking for our database connection parameters. So, lucky for us, we just happen to have those stored away in our connection setup inside of SQL Developer. So I'm just going to go ahead and just grab them right out of there. So it's looking for our host name here in the first line. Go ahead and paste that, and then it's 1521. That's the port we have. It's asking us here whether we would like to use a service name or specify a SID. Now, because we are using a pluggable database, we need to use a service name, and that is PDB1 in this case. And now it's going to want the password for the public user that we created. Or actually, it's creating it for us. I'm sorry. So here is the part, if you ever try to do this utilizing the Amazon RDS service, where you will beat your head against your desk because you must have a user with sysdba privileges to log in and complete this. And on the RDS service, you can't do that. So fail at that point if you're doing this on RDS, and I've tried multiple times. Doesn't work. If somebody out there knows how to do it, I'd love to know. But otherwise, because we have installed our database on an EC2 instance, we have complete access to it, and we can just go ahead with the default sys user here, and we will give it our super strong password. And make sure that we confirm what that super strong password is. And now it's just going to ask us some other questions here. So, hey, it's telling us if we're going to use Apex, we need to select number 1. That's what we're going to do. It's going to want the public user password that we created. And by the way, a good tip here is make sure you remember all these passwords. And now, yes, we'll go ahead and do all the stuff it would like us to do here. we created these as the last step in our database configuration of Apex. And now it's gonna go about doing what it does, writing a bunch of stuff out that you know, feels a little alarming in its verboseness, but actually everything should be okay here. And then this is important, enter 1 if you wish to start in standalone mode. That is exactly what we wish to do. And here is that magic question I told you it was going to ask you. And it's not super good about really being direct about what it's asking for here, but this is that Apex images directory that we copied down before. And I will just go copy that. I've also, if you followed along with my example, have this on my blog post as well. Oops, that is not right. So if you mess this up right here, what will happen is you won't be able to see anything when you try to log into your Apex instance. So super important that you get this right, but don't necessarily panic if you don't. You can redo this setup just by deleting this ords directory and starting over. Well, and I missed again. I'm desperately trying to break my Apex instance here. Okay, third time's a charm. There we go. We've got the Apex images directory, which is what it's looking for. And now that this thing is started up, we should be able to go out and access our Apex instance. So let's just jump back to our EC2. We can see here I've got this example Apex box. I'm going to come down here and grab this DNS. We'll jump into a new tab, put that in there with our 8080 port /ORDS. And if we hit enter, alright, so if we've done everything correctly, we will see our Oracle Application Express instance is alive and kicking, and we have our internal or management workspace all ready to go. We can sign into this and actually use this to create new workspaces. So quickly I'll just show you that we can jump in and create a dev workspace. And it helps if you spell things correctly, or it makes it hard to log back into them. Dev workspace, we just need to give it a 6-digit ID here. You could put a definition in if you wanted to. And then we need to create a schema. And I'm not feeling too creative at the moment, so we'll just give that a schema. Of course, you need to give it a admin name, a password for your admin, and email. And now you can create the workspace, and the database will go about creating everything it is you need to have an Apex workspace. And once this is complete, we should be able to log out of our admin console, and if we come back to our login here, then we can change our workspace name to our new, or I'm sorry, it was dev workspace. With our new admin user, and the first time we log in, it will want us to change our password. So we will go ahead and do that. And now that we have done that, we will be logged into our new workspace, and we can do all the wonderful things that we expect to be able to do with Apex. We can come in, create tables or any of the database objects we might need for Apex applications, and then of course we have our application builder that we can use to create apps, and there's a nice little sample application in here as well. So that concludes how to create a standalone Apex EC2 instance that you can connect to your standalone EC2 database instance. I showed you how to do in another video, and I hope that was helpful for folks, and happy creating.